Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. There's a lot of news coming out this week, and hot on the heels of the pre-order for the Orcs and Goblins, we're seeing the preview at Adepticon for the Dwarven Mountain Hold forces. Now, I think a lot of people were expecting the Dwarf Mountain Holds to get a bit of attention earlier than they have done. After all, we saw the leak of their army-specific dice back around the time of release, so I think it was a bit of a surprise that Orcs and Goblins came first. However, we are now in a position where we're moving into the fourth supported faction and starting to see information around that. Now, from initial information release to the Orcs and Goblins coming out was a period of, about 2 months. So I'm expecting this to come out, like April to May sort of time, I'd guess, depending on how quickly Games Workshop get a wriggle on and what their release plans look like. So without any further ado, let's have a look at what we're getting. And we're going to start off by looking at the Battalion box set. So this box set contains 66 models, 32 Dwarf Warriors, 32 Quarrelers, and 2 Gyrocopters. Now, it's expressly stated that the Gyrocopters can also be built as Gyro Bombers and the Quarrelers can be built as Thunderers. Nothing is said about the Dwarf Warrior weapon options, but I would imagine it's likely, given that the Orcs and Goblins came with a range of weapon options, that you'd be able to equip them either with hand weapon and shield or with great weapons. Overall, I think this box set feels more useful than the Orc and Goblin box set, although there's a couple of queries I would throw at it. In doing so, I'm ignoring the fact there's no characters or books. We know that these box sets aren't going to contain anything like that, and only the Battalion and Tomb King's launch boxes were designed to include characters and rulebooks. So what are these downsides? Well, I think the block of 32 Dwarf Warriors is suitable. I think that will see play, and they can, let's face it, be used as Longbeards. Interestingly, the Orc and Goblin Battalion, the Orc mob that came in about, I think it was 31 models, only came with command options for a single unit, so they have to be fielded together, or you need to go out and buy more stuff in order to field 2 separate units. I suspect the same will be true of this Dwarf unit. 32 for me is a little bit chunky. I think you're probably more likely to want that to be 2 units on the battlefield. 32 Dwarf Quarrelers, that feels like a lot to me. I wonder whether people will actually be fielding that many of them. Maybe if you're going full Linehammer, but overall it feels like there's models that are just not going to see use because you've just got too many of them there. The Gyrocopters, again, like the Chariots in the Orc list, I think they're going to be seeing a lot of play. It does seem that for the Dwarves, Gyrocopters are going to be one of the go-to units. So overall, yeah, I think it's a decent enough box. I think it's better than the Orc and Goblin box. Personally, yes, I'd make a couple of tweaks to it, but overall, it seems a reasonable starting point for a Dwarven host. Moving on, we've got the Arcane Journal. Once again, this is going to be fairly standard, some background information, 2 armies of infamy, some extra units, some magical gizmos, and 2 special characters. Now, we don't know at this point what the 2 armies of infamy are going to be. However, given some of the models that are being released, I would be absolutely amazed if one of them wasn't the force of the Slayer King himself. That would be a very different way of playing the Dwarves, really different dynamic to the normal force that we see out of the Forces of Fantasy book. So something there to be a bit interested in, I think, to see how that goes on. The lack of armour, but unbreakable nature of the Slayers would be interesting to see how that plays out. Let's move on to the models themselves. So the first model we see is a new Thane or Lord on Shield Bearers. Now, we knew this was coming because the rules basically say there's 3 warriors holding the shield, and the old model only had 2 dwarves holding up the shield. Looking at it, it seems, yeah, very much in tune with the kind of look of the old dwarves. A little bit fancier, but that's to be expected for a model of this stature. It's not too cyberpunky. I was slightly concerned. I think that they might lean slightly more into the Age of Sigmar influences. That doesn't seem to be the case with this model. So yeah, overall, I think it looks pretty interesting. And the fact it comes with the model being in plastic, I think, is a huge boon, because the old metal one was a little bit tricky to put together and keep everything balanced. So this should be a lot easier for us to work with. The next character worth having a look at is the Dwarf Lord on foot, and this will appear in the same kit as the Dwarf Lord on Shield Bearers. So a bit like the old Orc Warboss kit, where you had one mounted and one BSB option. You get effectively two models with the same kit. Both of them look pretty interesting, and seems that some of the parts definitely interchangeable, so you can make the Lord as unique to yourself as possible. Although, having said that, I suspect the number of interchangeable parts, given the way Games Workshop kits have developed over the years, will perhaps not be as many as you would initially like. A couple of characters also coming out in Forge World resin. One of them is a Thane with a handgun standing on an Oathstone. I think the Oathstone here is quite discreet. The model headgear looks very much like the old model, or should I say current model at the time of recording, Lord on Shield Bearers, so it definitely sort of feels within that vibe. The other is the first of our special characters, Ungrim Iron Fist, which is what really leads me to think that we're going to see the Slayer King's armies as one of the armies of infamy. The Slayer King model looks absolutely amazing. It could, to an extent, be the paint job, but I really, really like the look of this model. I've already seen a couple of comments about where's his banner. For those of you with long memories, you may recall the classic model, I think, had a back banner on it, but this guy just looks awesome. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he looks like in reality on the tabletop. The release then talks about returning plastics. So ironbreakers, hammerers, warriors, miners, and quarrelers. So all of the things you will need really to build out a core of your list. And on top of this, there's going to be a Slayer of Legend, so effectively a Slayer character, King on Oathstone, Runesmith, Gyrocopter, and cannons, which can be built as organ guns. The article goes on to talk about then returning metal miniatures, and here we see the Grudge Thrower, the Bolt Thrower, the Flame Cannon, Anvil of Doom, and a group of Master Engineers. This is starting to feel like a very complete version of the Dwarven army. Now, if we look at what we've seen so far with other forces, it's clear there's going to be 2 or 3 model drops. It has been with the Bretonnians, for example, and the Orc and Goblin pre-orders aren't a complete range. I would expect we'll see something similar, and even though they're telling us about an awful lot of stuff right now, I don't think it'll come out as one simple package. I think it will be staggered. If nothing else, given Games Workshop's ongoing logistical problems that we hear so much about, I think trying to do all of this at once would be probably a bit of a bridge too far. That segue aside, we're also going to see some classic Slayer models coming out. So again, would be really useful if there is a Slayer army as one of the armies of infamy. Finally, to talk about is the made to order stuff, which is going to be some of the old Imperial Dwarves and Joseph Bugman's cart. So again, there's going to be some things here that are really going to be helpful for the old Hammer players amongst us. And this includes a regiment of renown, which can be used as mercenaries for the dwarves and imperial forces. Interestingly, this regiment of renown isn't going to appear in the Arcane Journal. Their rules will be in the box with the models themselves. There is a note there's going to be some more made-to-order models coming. Runesmiths, a couple of Slayer characters, the Dwarf Queen, and then a Lord Thane and Shield Bearer. And these are going to be a combination of metal and resin models. However, at this time, Games Workshop have said the models aren't ready to be shown, but should be familiar to people who recall the old Warhammer Fantasy Battle days. So there we go, plenty to talk about, plenty to get excited about if you're a Dwarf player. Now, many of you will know, certainly those of you who have been watching the channel for a while, that this channel really kicked off around the idea of me collecting a Dwarf army. So will I be interested in picking up the Arcane Journal? Absolutely. Are any of the models they're talking about of interest to me? Well, I've already got a Lord on Shield Bearers, but I think the new one does look fantastic, so I may well try and pick that up. My only concern being the issues we've had around pre-orders, but I don't expect these to be limited release models, and Dwarves are my current project, so I can afford to wait if need be. So yeah, there's things that maybe could be slightly better, but overall I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing at the Adepticon releases, or preview of information, I should say. So yeah, overall, really positive. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. If you've got a particular view on the models that are being talked about at this point in time, do let me know down in the comments below. Is there anything you particularly want, or any of the models you particularly want to avoid? Again, do let me know. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this video and others like it, do consider subscribing. It's the best way of supporting a small channel. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.